Hello and welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin. I got my camera fixed. Look what I did. This little stuff from Walmart. Blasted out the little ports. Bam, 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 and we're back on the air. So glad that happened. And yeah, so tonight we're gonna do uh, the one about the whales, cetology. Now, someone had I forget, it was like a comment, and somebody said, a word of warning. There's one about whale. This was some bad thing. And I told this person, I think you're missing the point. That's what makes this book a masterpiece. One of the reasons is because it dives right into things like, science, classification of whales, and all that kind of thing. So, anyway, this is a this is I don't know. It's a great book, and we're about to see why. Where are we at here? Okay. Chapter 32. Cetology. Already we are boldly launched upon the deep, but soon we shall be lost in its unshored, harborless immensities. Ere that come to pass, ere the Pequod's weedy hull rolls side by side with the barnacled hulls of the Leviathan, at the outset, it is but well to attend to a matter almost indispensable to a thorough, appreciative understanding of the more special Leviathanic revelations and allusions of all sorts which are to follow. It is some systematized exhibition of the whale in his broad genera that I would now fain put before you. Yet it is no easy task. The classification of the constituents of a chaos, nothing less, is here essayed. Listen to what the best and latest authorities have laid down. No branch of zoology is so much involved as that which is entitled cetology, says Captain Scoresby, A.D. 1820. It is not my intention, were it in my power, to enter into the inquiry as to the true method of dividing the cetacea into groups and families. Utter confusion exists among the historians of this animal, sperm whale, says Surgeon Beale, A.D. 1839. Unfitness to pursue our research in the unfathomable waters, impenetrable veil covering our knowledge of the cetacea, a field strewn with thorns. All these are incomplete indications, but serve to torture us naturalists. Thus speak of the whale, the great Cuvier, and John Hunter, and Lesson, those lights of zoology and anatomy. Nevertheless, though a real knowledge there be little, yet of books there are plenty. Nevertheless, though of real knowledge there be little, yet of books there are plenty, and so in some small degree with cetology or the science of whales. Many are the men, small and great, old and new, landsmen and seamen, who have at large or in little written of the whale. Run over a few. The authors of the Bible, Aristotle, Pliny, Aldrovandi, Sir Thomas Browne, Gesner, Ray, Linnaeus, Rondeletius, Willoughby, Willoughby, Green, Artidi, Sebald, Brisson, Martin, Lesapede, Bonneterre, Desmarest, Baron Cuvier, Frederick Cuvier, John Hunter, Owen Scoresby, Beale, Bennett, J. Ross Brown, the author of Miriam Coffin, Olmsted, and the Reverend T. Cheever. But to what ultimate generalizing purpose all these have written, the above cited extracts will show. Of the names in this list of whale authors, only those following Owen ever saw living whales, and but one of them was a real professional harpooner and whaleman. I mean Captain Scoresby. On the separate on the separate subject of the Greenland or right whale, he is the best existing authority. But Scoresby knew nothing and says nothing of the great sperm whale, compared with which the Greenland whale is almost unworthy mentioning. And here be it said that the Greenland whale is a usurper upon the throne of the seas. He is not even by any means the largest of the whales, yet owing to the long priority of his claims and the profound ignorance which till some 70 years back invested the then fabulous or utterly unknown sperm whale, and which ignorance to this day still reigns in all but a few in which ignorance to this present day still reigns in all but some few scientific retreats and whale ports, this usurpation has been every way complete. Reference to nearly all the Leviathanic allusions in the great poets of past days will satisfy you that the Greenland whale, without one rival, was to them the monarch of the seas. But the time has come at last for a new proclamation. This is Charing Cross. This is Charing Cross. Hear ye, good people all. The Greenland whale is disposed. The great sperm whale now reigneth. There are only two books in being which at all pretend to put the living sperm whale before you, and at the same time, in the remotest degree, succeed in the attempt. These books are Beale's and Bennett's, both in their time surgeons to the English South Sea whale ships, and both exact and reliable men. The original matter touching the sperm whale to be found in their volumes is necessarily small, but so far as it goes, it is of excellent quality, though almost confined to scientific description. As yet, however, the sperm whale, scientific or poetic, lives not complete in any literature. Far above all other hunted whales, his is an unwritten life. Coink. I gotta check on something. Hope you're doing well, whether you are live or whether you're catching the replay. Uh-oh. My computer is being so slow. Apologize for that. So yeah, we're in the one cetology, and we're learning about whales tonight. Now, the various species of whales need some sort of popular comprehensive classification, if only an easy outline one for the present, hereafter to be filled in all outward its departments by subsequent laborers. As no better man advances to take this matter in hand, I hereupon offer my own poor endeavors. I promise nothing complete, because any human thing supposed to be complete must for that very reason infallibly be faulty. I shall not pretend to a minute anatomical description of the various species, or in this space at least, too much of any description. My object here is simply to project the draught. My object here is simply to protect the draft of a systematization. He's got some big words, or long words anyway. My object here is simply to protect the draft of the systematization. My object here is simply to protect the draft of a systematization of cetology. I am the architect, not the builder. But it is a ponderous task. No ordinary letter sorter in the post office is equal to it. To grope down into the bottom of the sea after them, to have one's hands among the unspeakable foundations, ribs, and very pelvis of the world. This is a fearful thing. What am I that I should essay to hook the nose of this Leviathan? The awful tauntings in Job might well appall me. Will he, the Leviathan, make a covenant with thee? Behold, the hope of him is vain. But I have swam through libraries and sailed through oceans. But I have swam through libraries and sailed through oceans. I have had to do with these whales and these I have had to do with whales with these visible hands. I am in earnest, and I will try. There are some preliminaries to settle. First, the uncertain, unsettled condition of this science of cetology is in the very vestibule, attested by the fact that in some quarters it still remains a moot point whether a whale be a fish. In his System of Nature, AD 1776, Linnaeus declares, I hereby separate the whales from the fish, but of my knowledge, I know that down I know that down to the year 1850, sharks and shad, alewives and herring, against Linnaeus's express edict, were still found dividing the possession of the same seas with the Leviathan. The grounds upon which Linnaeus would fain have banished the whales from the waters, he states as follows: on account of their warm biocular heart, their lungs, their movable eyelids, their hollow ears, penum in. All right, I'm about to butcher some Latin, and we're just going to pretend like it never happened. Penum intratum feminum mammus lictantum, and finally, ex lege naturae jure meritoc. I submitted all this to my friends Simeon Macy and Charlie Coffin of Nantucket, both messmates of mine in a certain voyage, and they united in the opinion that the reasons set forth were altogether insufficient. Charlie profanely hinted they were humbug. Be it known that, waiving all argument, I take the good old-fashioned ground that the whale is a fish, and call upon holy Jonah to back me. This foundational thing settled, the next point is, in what internal respect does the whale differ from the other fish? Above, Linnaeus has given you those items, but in brief they are these: lungs and warm blood, whereas all other fish are lungless and cold-blooded. But in brief they are these: lungs and warm blood, whereas all other fish are lungless and cold-blooded. Next, how shall we define the whale by his obvious externals so as conspicuously to label him for all time to come? To be short, then, a whale is a spouting fish with a horizontal tail. There you have it. However contracted, that definition is the result of expanded meditation. A walrus spouts much like a whale, but the walrus is not a fish because he's amphibious. But the last term of the definition is still more cogent as coupled with the first. Almost anyone must have noticed that all the fish familiar to landsmen have not a flat but vertical or up and down tail, whereas among spouting fish, the tail, though it may be similarly shaped, invariably assumes a horizontal position. By the above definition of what a whale is, I do by no means exclude from the Leviathanic brotherhood any sea creature hitherto identified with the whale by the best informed Nantucketers, nor, on the other hand, link with it any fish hitherto authoritatively regarded as alien. Hence, all the smaller spouting and horizontal-tailed fish must be included in this ground plan of cetology. Now then come the grand divisions of the entire whale host. I am aware that down to the present time, the fish styled lamatins and dugongs, pigfish and sowfish of the coffins of Nantucket, are included by many naturalists among the whales. But as these pigfish are a noisy, contemptible set, mostly lurking in the mouths of rivers and feeding on wet hay, and especially as they do not spout, I deny their credentials as whales, and have presented them with their passports to quit the kingdom of cetology. First, according to magnitude, I divide the whales into 3 primary books, subdivisible into chapters, and these shall comprehend them all, both large and small. 1. The folio whale. 2. The octavo whale. 3. the duodecimo whale, as the type of folio one present the sperm whale, and of the octavo, the grampus, of the duodecimo, the porpoise. Folios among these I here include the following chapters: 1. The sperm whale. 2. The right whale. 3. The finback whale. 4. The humpbacked whale. 5. The razorback whale. 6. The sulphur bottom whale. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 1, Sperm whale. This whale, among the English of old vaguely known as the trumpa whale and the physeter whale and the anvil-headed whale, is the present, how do I even say that word? Cachalot? What? Cachalot. Cachalot. I was right. Is the present cachalot of the French, and the potsfish of the Germans, and the macrocephalus of the long words. He is, without doubt, the largest inhabitant of the globe, the most formidable of all whales to encounter, the most majestic in aspect, and lastly, by far, the most valuable in commerce, he being the only creature from which that valuable substance, spermaceti, is obtained. All his peculiarities will, in many other places, be enlarged upon. It is chiefly with his name that I now have to do. Philologically considered, it is absurd. Some centuries ago, when the sperm whale was almost wholly unknown in his own proper individuality, and when his oil was only accidentally obtained from the stranded fish, in those days, spermaceti, it would seem, was popularly supposed to be derived from a creature identical with the one then known in England as the Greenland or right whale. It was the idea also that this same spermaceti was that quickening humor of the Greenland whale, which the first syllable of the word by an ounce of which the first syllable of the word literally expresses. In those times also, spermaceti was exceedingly scarce, not being used for light, but only as an ointment and medicament. It was only to be had from the druggists, as you nowadays buy an ounce of rhubarb. When, as I opine in the course of time, the true nature of spermaceti became known, its original name was still retained by the dealers, no doubt to enhance its value by a notion so strangely significant of its scarcity. And so the appellation must at last have come to be bestowed upon the whale from which this spermaceti was really derived. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 2, Right Whale. In one respect, this is the most venerable of the leviathans, being the one first regularly hunted by man. It yields the article commonly known as whalebone or baleen, and the oil specifically known as whale oil, an inferior article in commerce. Among the fishermen, he is indiscriminately designated by all the following titles: the whale, the Greenland whale, the black whale, the great whale, the true whale, the right whale. There is a deal of obscurity concerning the identity of the species thus multitudinously baptized. What then is the whale, which I include in the second species of my folios? It is the great mysticetus. It is the great mysticetus of the English naturalists, the Greenland whale of the English whalemen, the baleen ordinaire of the French whalemen, the Growland's wallfish of the Swedes. It is the whale which for more than 2 centuries past has been hunted by the Dutch and English in the Arctic seas. It is the whale which the American fishermen have long pursued in the Indian Ocean, on the Brazil banks, or on the northwest coast and various other parts of the world, designated by them right whale cruising grounds. Some pretend to see a difference between the Greenland whale of the English and the right whale of the Americans, but they precisely agree in all their grand features, nor has there yet been presented a single determinate fact upon which to ground a radical distinction. It is by endless subdivision based upon the most inconclusive differences that some departments of natural history become so repellingly intricate. The right whale will be elsewhere treated of at some length, to eluci- with reference to elucidating the with reference to elucidating the sperm whale. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 3, Finback. Under this head, I reckon a monster which, by the various names of finback, tall spout, and long john, has been almost in every sea, and is commonly the whale whose distant jet is so often descried by passengers crossing the Atlantic in the New York packet tracks. In the length he attains, and in his baleen, the finback resembles the right whale, but is of a less portly girth and a lighter color, approaching to olive. His great lips present a cable-like aspect, formed by the intertwisting, slanting folds of large wrinkles. His grand distinguishing feature, the fin, from which he derives his name, is often a conspicuous object. This fin in this fin in some this fin is some 3 or 4 feet long, growing vertically from the hinder part of the back, of an angular shape, and with a very sharp-pointed end. Even if not the slightest other part of the creature, Even if not the slightest other part of the creature be visible, this isolated fin will at times be seen plainly projecting from the surface. When the sea is moderately calm and slightly marked with spherical ripples, and this gnome and this gnomon-like fin stands up and casts shadows upon the wrinkled surface, it may well be supposed that the watery circle surrounding it somewhat resembles a dial, with its style and wavy hour lines graved on it. On that Ahaz dial, the shadow often goes back. The finback is not gregarious. He seems a whale hater, as some men are man haters, very shy, always going solitary, unexpectedly rising to the surface in the remotest and most sullen waters. His straight and single lofty jet rising like a tall misanthropic spear upon a barren plain, gifted with such wondrous power and velocity in swimming as to defy all present pursuit from man. This Leviathan seems the banished and unconquerable Cain of his race, bearing for his mark that style upon his back. From having the baleen in his mouth, the finback is sometimes included with the right whale among a theoretic species denominated whalebone whales, that is, whales with baleen. Of these so-called whalebone whales, there would seem to be several varieties, most of which, however, are little known. Broad-nosed whales and beaked whales, pike-headed whales, bunched whales, underjawed whales, and rostrated whales are the fishermen's names for a few sorts. In connection with this appellative of whalebone whales, it is of great importance to mention that however such a nomenclature may be convenient in facilitating allusions to some kind of whales, yet it is vain to attempt a clear classification of the Leviathan, founded upon either his baleen, or hump, or fin, or teeth, notwithstanding that those marked parts or features very obviously seem better adapted to afford the basis for a regular system of cetology than any other detached bodily distinctions, which the whale in his kinds presents. How then? The baleen, hump, back fin, and teeth, these are those things whose peculiarities are indiscriminately dispersed among all sorts of whales, without any record to what may be the nature of their structure in other and more essential particulars. Thus, the sperm whale and the humpbacked whale each has a hump, but there the similitude ceases. Then the same humpbacked whale and the Greenland whale, each of these has baleen, but there again the similitude ceases, and it is just the same with the other parts above mentioned. In various sorts of whales, they form such irregular combinations, or in the case of any one of them detached, such an irregular isolation as utterly to defy all general methodization formed on such a basis. On this rock, every one of the whale naturalists has split. But it may possibly be conceived that in the internal parts of the whale, in his anatomy, there at least we shall be able to hit the right classification. Nay, what thing, for example, is there in the Greenland whale's anatomy more striking than his baleen? Yet we have seen that by his baleen it is impossible to Yet we have seen that by his baleen it is impossible correctly to classify the Greenland whale. And if you descend into the bowels of the various leviathans, why there you'll find not distinctions a 50th part as available to the systematizer as those external ones already enumerated. What then remains? Nothing but to take hold of the whales bodily in their entire liberal volume and sort them and boldly sort them that way. And this is the bibliographical system here adopted. And it's the only one that can possibly succeed, for it alone is practicable to proceed. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 4, Humpback. This whale is often seen on the northern American coast. He has been frequently captured there and towed into harbor. He has a great pack on him like a peddler, or you might call him the elephant, or you might call him the elephant and castle whale. At any rate, the popular name for him does not sufficiently distinguish him, since the sperm whale also has a hump, though a smaller one. His oil is not very valuable. He has baleen. He is the most gamesome and light-hearted of all the whales, making more gay foam and white water generally than any other of them. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 5, Razorback. Of this whale, little is known but his name. I have seen him at a distance off Cape Horn. Of a retiring nature, he eludes both hunters and philosophers. Though no coward, he has never yet shown any part of him but his back, which rises in a long, sharp ridge. Let him go. I know little more of him, nor does anybody else. Book 1, Folio, Chapter 6, Sulphur Bottom. Another retiring gentleman with a brimstone belly, doubtless got by scraping along the Tartarian tiles in some of his profounder divings, he is seldom seen. At least, I have never seen him, except in the remoter southern seas, and then always at too great a distance to study his countenance. He's never chased. He would run away with rope walks of line. Prodigies are told of him. Adieu, Sulphur Bottom. I can say nothing more that is true of ye, nor can the oldest Nantucketer. Thus ends Book 1, Folio, and now begins Book 2, Octavo. Octavos. These embrace the whales of midland magnitude, among which present may be numbered 1, the grampus; 2, the blackfish; 3, the narwhale; 4, the thrasher; 5, the killer. Why this book of whales is not denominated the quarto is very plain, because while the whales of this order, though smaller than those of the former order, nevertheless retain a proportionate likeness to them in figure, yet the bookbinder's quarto volume in its dimensional form does not preserve the shape of the folio volume, but the octavo volume does. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 1, Grampus. Though this fish, whose loud, sonorous breathing, or rather blowing, has furnished a proverb to landsmen, it is so well known a denizen of the deep, yet is he not popularly classed among whales. Possessing all the grand distinctive features of the Leviathan, most naturalists have recognized him for one. He is of moderate octave size, varying from 15 to 25 feet in length, and of corresponding dimensions round the waist. He swims in herds. He is never regularly hunted, though his oil is considerable in quantity and pretty good for light. By some fishermen, his approach is regarded as premonitory. In the advance of the great sperm whale. Book 2, Octavo. Chapter 2, Blackfish. I give the popular fishermen's names for all these fish, for generally they are best. Where any names happen to be vague or inexpressive, I shall say so and suggest another. I do so now touching the blackfish, so called because the blackness is the rule among almost all whales. So call him the hyena whale, if you please. His voracity is well known, and from the circumstance that the inner angles of his lips are curved inwards, he carries an everlasting Mephistophelian grin on his face. This whale averages some 16 or 18 feet in length. He is found in almost all latitudes. He has a particular way of showing his dorsal hooked fin in swimming, which looks something like a Roman nose. When not more profitably employed, the sperm whale hunters sometimes capture the hyena. The sperm whale hunters sometimes capture the hyena whale to keep up the supply of cheap oil for domestic employment, as some frugal housekeepers, in the absence of company and quite alone by themselves, burn unsavory tallow instead of odorous wax. Though their blubber is very thin, some of these whales will yield you upwards of 30 gallons of oil. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 3, Narwhale, that is, nostril whale. Another instance of a curiously named whale, so named, I suppose, from this peculiar horn being originally mistaken for a peaked nose. The creature is some 16 feet in length, while its horn averages 5 feet, though some exceed 10 and even attain to 15 feet. Strictly speaking, this horn is but a lengthened tusk, growing out from the jaw line in a little depressed growing out from the jaw in a line a little depressed from the horizontal. But it's only found on the sinister side, which has an ill effect, giving its owner something analogous to the aspect of a clumsy left-handed man. Giving its owner something analogous to the aspect of a clumsy left-handed man. What precise purpose this ivory horn or lance answers, it would be hard to say. It does not seem to be used like the blade of the swordfish and billfish, though some sailors tell me that the narwhale employs it for a rake in hunting over the bottom of the sea for food. Charlie Coffin said it was used as an ice piercer, for the narwhale, rising to the surface of the polar sea and finding it sheeted with ice, thrusts his horn up and so breaks through. But you cannot prove either of these surmises to be correct. My own opinion is that however this one-sided horn may really be used by the narwhal, however that may be, it would certainly be very convenient for him. It would certainly be very convenient for It would certainly be very convenient to him for a folder in reading pamphlets. The narwhal I have heard called the tusked whale, the horned whale, and the unicorn whale. The narwhal I have heard called the tusked whale, the horned whale, and the unicorn whale. He is certainly a curious example of the unicornism to be found in almost every kingdom of animated nature. From certain cloistered old authors, I have gathered that this same sea unicorn's horn was in ancient days regarded as the great antidote against poison, and as such, preparations of it brought immense prices. It was also distilled to a volatile salt. It was also distilled to a volatile salts for fainting ladies, the same way that the horns of the male deer are manufactured into hartshorn. Originally, it was itself accounted an object of great curiosity. Blackletter tells me that Sir Martin Frobisher, on his return from that voyage when Queen Bess did gallantly wave her jeweled hand to him from a window of Greenwich Palace as his bold ship sailed down the Thames, when Sir Martin returned from that voyage, saith Blackletter, on bended knees he presented to her highness a prodigious long horn of the narwhal, which for a long period after hung in the castle at Windsor. An Irish author avers that the Earl of Leicester, on bended knees, did likewise present to her highness another horn pertaining to a land beast of the unicorn nature. The narwhal has a very picturesque leopard-like look, being of a milky white ground color, dotted with round and oblong spots of black. His oil is very superior, clear and fine, but there is little of it, and he is seldom hunted. He is mostly found in the circumpolar seas. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 4, Killer. Of this whale, little is precisely known to the Nantucketer. and nothing at all to the professed naturalists. From what I have seen of him at a distance, I should say that he's about the bigness of a grampus. He is very savage, a sort of Fiji fish. He sometimes takes the great folio whales by the lip and hangs there like a leech till the mighty brute is worried to death. The killer is never hunted. I never heard what sort of oil he has. Exception might be taken to the name bestowed upon this whale on the ground of its indistinctness. For we are all killers, on land and on sea, Bonapartes and sharks included. Book 2, Octavo, Chapter 5, Thrasher. This gentleman is famous for his tail, which he used for a ferule in thrashing his foes. This gentleman is famous for his tail, which he uses for a ferule in thrashing his foes. He mounts the folio whale's back, and as he swims, he works his passage by flogging him, as some schoolmasters get along in the world by a similar process. Still less is known of the thrasher than of the killer. Both are outlaws, even in the lawless seas. Thus ends Book 2, Octavo. Thus ends Book 2, Octavo, and begins Book 3, Duodecimo. Duodecimos. These include the smaller whales. 1. The Huzza porpoise. 2. The Algerine porpoise. 3. The mealy-mouthed porpoise. To those who have not chanced specifically to study the subject, it may possibly seem strange that fishes not commonly exceeding 4 or 5 feet should be marshaled among whales, a word which in the popular sense always conveys an idea of hugeness. But the creatures set down above as duodecimos are infallibly whales by the terms of my definition of what a whale is, i.e., a spouting fish with a horizontal tail. Book 3, Duodecimo, Chapter 1, Huzza porpoise. This is the common porpoise found all over the globe. The name is of my own bestowal. There are more than one sort of porpoises, and something must be done to distinguish them. I call him thus because he always swims in hilarious shoals, which upon the broad sea keep tossing themselves to heaven like caps in a 4th of July crowd. Their appearance is generally hailed with delight by the mariner. Full of fine spirits, they invariably come from the breezy billows to windward. They are the lads that always live before the wind. They are accounted a lucky omen. If you yourself can withstand 3 cheers at beholding these vivacious fish, then heaven help you. The spirit of godly gamesomeness is not in you. A well-fed, plump Huzza porpoise will yield you 1 good gallon of good oil. But the fine and delicate fluid extracted from his jaws is exceedingly valuable. It is in request among jewelers and watchmakers. Sailors put it on their hones. Porpoise meat is good eating, you know. It may never have occurred to you that a porpoise spouts. Indeed, his spout is so small that it's not very readily discernible. But the next time you have a chance, watch him, and you'll see then the great sperm whale himself in miniature. Book 3, Duodecimo, Chapter 2, Algerine porpoise. A pirate, very savage. He is only found, I think, in the Pacific. He is somewhat larger than the Huzza porpoise, but much of the same general make. Provoke him, and he will buckle to a shark. I have lowered for him many times, but never yet saw him captured. Book 3, Duodecimo, Chapter 3, Mealy-mouthed porpoise. The largest kind of porpoise, and only found in the Pacific so far as it is known. The only English name by which he has been hitherto designated is that of the Fisher right whale porpoise, from the circumstance that he is chiefly round in the vicinity of that folio. In shape, he differs in some degree from the Huzza porpoise, being of a less rotund and jolly girth. Indeed, he is of quite a neat and gentlemanlike figure. He has no fins on his back, most other porpoises have. He has a lovely tail and sentimental Indian eyes of a hazel hue. But his mealy mouth spoils him, though his entire back down to his side fins, is of a deep sable, yet a boundary line, distinct as the mark in a ship's hull, called the bright distinct as the mark in a ship's hull, called the bright waist, that line streak called the bright waist, that line streaks him from stern to stern with two separate colors, black above and white below. The white comprises part of his head and the whole of his mouth, which makes him look as if he had just escaped from a felonious visit to a meal bag, and a most mean and mealy aspect. His oil is much like that of the common porpoise. Beyond the duodecimo, the system does not proceed, inasmuch as the porpoise is the smallest of the whales. Above, you have all the leviathans of note, but there are a rabble of uncertain, fugitive, half-fabulous whales, which, as an American whaleman, I know by reputation, but not personally. I shall enumerate them by their forecastle appellations, for possibly such a list may be valuable to future investigators, who may complete what I have here but begun. If any of the following whales shall hereafter be caught and marked, then he can readily be incorporated into this system, according to his folio, octavo, or duodecimo magnitude. The bottlenose whale, the junk whale, the pudding-headed whale, the Cape whale, the leading whale, the cannon whale, the scrag whale, the coppered whale, the elephant whale, the iceberg whale, the quag whale, the blue whale, and from Icelandic, Dutch, and Old English authorities, there might be quoted other lists of uncertain whales blessed with all manner of uncouth names. But I omit them as altogether obsolete, and can hardly help suspecting them from mere sounds full of leviathanism, but signifying nothing. Finally, it was stated at the outset that this system would not be here at once perfected. You cannot but plainly see that I have kept my word. But I now leave my cetological system standing thus unfinished, even as the great cathedral of Cologne was left, with the cranes still standing upon the top of the uncompleted tower. For small erections may be finished by their first architects. Grand ones, true ones, ever leave the copestone to posterity. God keep me from ever completing anything. This whole book is but a draft, nay, but the draft of a draft. Oh, time, strength, cash, and patience. That was chapter 32. That's the whale. That's the whale chapter. All right, let's see. Chapter 33, the speck cinder. Concerning the officers of the whale craft, this seems as good a place as any to set down a little domestic peculiarity on shipboard, arising from the existence of the harpooner class of officers, a class unknown, of course, in any other marine than the whale fleet. The large importance attached to the harpooner's vocation is evinced by the fact that originally, in the old Dutch fishery, 2 centuries and more ago, the command of a whale ship was not wholly lodged in the person now called the captain, but was divided between him and an officer called the speck-cinder. Literally, this word means fat cutter. Usage, however, in time made it equivalent to chief harpooner. In those days, the captain's authority was restricted to the navigation and general management of the vessel, while over the whale hunting department and all its concerns, the speck-cinder or chief harpooner reigned supreme. In the British Greenland fishery, under the corrupted title of specksioneer, this old Dutch official is still retained, but his former dignity is sadly abridged. At present, he ranks simply as senior harpooner, and as such is but one of the captain's more inferior subalterns. Nevertheless, as upon the good conduct of the harpooners, the success of a whaling voyage largely depends. And since in the American fishery he is not only an important officer in the boat, but under certain circumstances, night watches on a whaling ground, the command of the ship's deck is also his. Therefore, the grand political maxim of the sea demands that he should nominally live apart from the men before the mast, and be in some way distinguished as their professional superior, though always by them familiarly regarded as social equal. Now the grand distinction between officer and man at sea is this. Now, the grand distinction between officer and man at sea is this. The first lives aft, the last forward. Hence, in whale ships and merchant ships alike, the mates have their quarters with the captain, and so too, in most of the American whalers, the harpooners are lodged in the after part of the ship. That is to say, they take their meals in the captain's cabin and sleep in a place indirectly communicating with it. Though the long period of a southern whaling voyage, by far the longest of all voyages now or ever made by man, the peculiar perils of it, and the community of interest prevailing among a company, all of whom, high or low, depend for their profits, not upon fixed wages, but upon their common luck, together with their common vigilance, intrepidity, and hard work. Though all these things do in some cases tend to beget a less rigorous discipline than in merchantmen generally, yet never mind how much like an old Mesopotamian family these whalemen may, in some primitive instances, live together. For all that, the I think I looked at that the other night. What is it? Punctilious?
Punctilious.
Yep. For all that, the punctilious externals, at least, of the quarterdeck are seldom materially relaxed, and in no instance done away. Indeed, many are the Nantucket ships in which you will see the skipper parading his quarterdeck with an elated grandeur not surpassed in any military navy, nay, extorting almost as much outward homage as if he wore the imperial purple and not the shabbiest of pilot cloth. And though of all men the moody captain of the Pequod was the least given to that sort of shallowest assumption, and though the only homage he ever exacted was implicit, instantaneous obedience, though he required no man to remove the shoes from his feet ere stepping upon the quarterdeck, and though there were times when, owing to peculiar circumstances connected with events hereafter to be detailed, he addresses them in unusual terms, whether of condescension or in terrorem or otherwise, yet even Captain Ahab was by no means unobservant of the paramount forms and usages of the sea. Nor perhaps will it fail to be eventually perceived that behind those forms and usages, as it were, he sometimes masked himself, incidentally making use of them for other and more private ends than they were legitimately intended to observe. That certain subtletism of his brain, which had otherwise in good degree remained unmanifested, through these forms, that certain sultanism of his brain, which had otherwise in a good degree remained unmanifested, through those forms that same sultanism became incarnate in an irresistible dictatorship. For be a man's intellectual superiority what it will, it can never assume the practical, available supremacy over other men, without the aid of some sort of external arts and entrenchments, always in themselves more or less paltry and base. This it is that forever keeps God's true princes of the empire from the world's hustings, and leaves the highest honors that this air can give to those men who become more famous through their infinite inferiority to the choice hidden handful of the divine inert than through their undoubted superiority over the dead level of the mass. Such large virtue lurks in these small things when extreme political superstitions invest them, that in some royal instances, even to idiot imbecility, they have imparted potency. But when, as in the case of Nicholas the Tsar, the ringed crown of geographical empire encircles an imperial brain, then the plebeian herds crouch abased before the tremendous centralization. Nor will the tragic dramatist, who would depict moral indomitableness in its fullest sweep and direct swing, ever forget a hint, incidentally so important in his art as the one now alluded to. But Ahab, my captain, still moves before me in all his Nantucket grimness and shagginess, and in this episode touching emperors and kings, I must not conceal that I have only to do with a poor old whale hunter like him, and therefore all outward majestical trappings and housings are denied me. O Ahab, what shall be grand in thee? It must be plucked at from the skies, and dived for in the deep, and featured in the unbodied air. End of chapter 3. Oh, you bet, Soup. Absolutely. I'm afraid my camera's about to overheat. It's about to start blinking at me, and it's going to go off. I know what I'm going to cool it off. I'm going to try to do one more chapter, but first, a quick little cool off. All right. Almost ready here. Okay. I would if I could. All right. Chapter 34. The Cabin Table. It is noon, and Doughboy, the steward, thrusting his pale, loaf-of-bread face from the cabin scuttle, announces dinner to his lord and master, who, sitting in the lee quarter-boat, has just been taking an observation of the sun, and now mutely reckoning the latitude on the smooth, medallion-shaped tablet reserved for that daily purpose on the upper part of his ivory leg. From his complete inattention to the tidings, you would think that moody Ahab had not heard his menial. But presently, catching hold of the mizzen shrouds, he swings himself to the deck, and in an even, unexhilarated voice, saying, "Dinner, Mr. Starbuck," disappears into the cabin. When the last echo of his sultan step has died away, and Starbuck, the first emir, has every reason to suppose that he is seated, then Starbuck rouses from his quietude, takes a few turns along the planks, and after a grave peep into the binnacle says, with some touch of pleasantness, "Dinner, Mr. Stubb," and descends the scuttle. The second emir lounges about the rigging a while, then slightly shaking the main brace to see whether it will be all right with that important rope, he likewise takes up the old burden, and with a rapid "Dinner, Mr. Flask," follows after his predecessors. But the third emir, now seeing himself all alone on the quarter-deck, seems to feel relieved from some curious restraint, for tipping all sorts of knowing winks in all sorts of directions, and kicking off his shoes, he strikes into a sharp but noiseless squall of a hornpipe right over the Grand Turk's head, and then, by a dexterous sleight, pitching his cap up into the mizzen-top for a shelf, he goes rollicking so far, at least, as he remains visible from the deck, reversing all other processions by bringing up the rear with music. But ere stepping into the cabin doorway below, he pauses, ships a new face altogether, and then, independent, hilarious little Flask enters King Ahab's presence in the character of Objectives, or the slave. It is not the least among the strange things bred by the intense artificialness of sea usages that while in the open air of the deck, some officers will, upon provocation, bear themselves boldly and defyingly enough towards their commander, yet 10 to 1, let those very officers the next moment go down to their customary dinner in that same commander's cabin, and straightway their inoffensive, not to say deprecatory and humble air towards him as he sits at the head of table. This is marvelous and sometimes most comical. Wherefore this difference? A problem? Perhaps not. To have been Belshazzar, king of Babylon, and to have had Belshazzar not haughtily but courteously therein and to have been Belshazzar not haughtily but courteously therein certainly must have been some touch of mundane grandeur. But he who in the rightly regal and intelligent spirit presides over his own private dinner table, but he who in the right But he who in the rightly regal and intelligent spirit presides over his own private dinner table of invited guests, that man's unchallenged power and dominion of individual influence for the time, that man's loyalty of state transcends Belshazzar. For Belshazzar was not the greatest. Who has but once dined his friends, has tasted what it is to be Caesar. Who has but once dined his friends has tasted what it is to be Caesar. It is a witchery of social czarship which there is no withstanding. Now, if to this consideration you superadd the official supremacy of a shipmaster, then by inference you will derive the cause of that peculiarity of sea life just mentioned. Over his ivory inlaid table, Ahab presided like a mute, maned sea lion on the white coral beach, surrounded by his warlike but still deferential cubs. In his own proper turn, each officer waited to be served. They were as little children before Ahab, and yet in Ahab there seemed not to lurk the smallest social arrogance. With one mind, their intent eyes all fastened upon the old man's knife as he carved the chief dish before him. I do not suppose for all the world that they would have profaned that moment with the slightest observation, or even upon so neutral a topic as the weather. No. And when reaching out his knife and fork between which the slice of beef was locked, Ahab thereby motioned Starbuck's plate towards him. The mate received his meat as though receiving alms, and cut it tenderly, and a little started if perchance the knife grazed against the plate, and chewed it noiselessly, and swallowed it not without circumspection. For like the coronation banquet at Frankfurt, there the German emperor profoundly dines, where the German emperor profoundly dines with the 7 imperial electors, so these cabin meals were somehow solemn meals, eaten in awful silence. And yet at table old Ahab forbade not conversation. Only he himself was dumb. What a relief it was to choking Stubb when a rat made a sudden racket in the hold below. And poor little Flask, he was the youngest son and little boy of his weary family party, his were the shin bones of the saline beef. His would have been the drumsticks. For Flask to have presumed to help himself, this must have seemed to him tantamount to larceny in the first degree. Had he helped himself at table, doubtless never more would he have been able to hold his head up in this honest world. Nevertheless, strange to say, Ahab never forbade him. And had Flask helped himself, the chances were Ahab had never such as noticed it. Least of all did Flask The chances were that Ahab never so much as noticed it. Least of all did Flask presume to help himself to butter. Whether he thought the owners of the ship denied it to him on account of its clotting his clear, sunny complexion, or whether he deemed that on so long a voyage in such marketless water, butter was at a premium and therefore was not for him, a subaltern, however it was, Flask, alas, was a butterless man. Another thing. Flask was the last person down at the dinner, and Flask is the first man up. Consider, For hereby Flask's dinner was badly jammed in point of time. For hereby Flask's dinner was badly jammed in point of time. Starbuck and Stubb both had the start of him, and yet they also have the privilege of lounging in the rear. If Stubb, even, who is but a peg higher than Flask, happens to have but a small appetite, and soon shows symptoms of concluding his repast, then Flask must bestir himself. He will not get more than 3 mouthfuls that day, for it is against holy usage for Stubb to precede Flash, for it is against holy usage to precede Flask to the deck. Therefore it was that Flask once admitted in private that ever since he had risen to the dignity of an officer, from that moment he had never known what it was to be otherwise than hungry, more or less. For he ate what he did not so much for what he ate did not so much relieve his hunger as keep it immortal in him. Peace and satisfaction, thought Flask, have forever departed from my stomach. I am an officer, but how I wish I could be but how I wish I could fish a bit of old-fashioned beef in the forecastle as I used to when I was before the mast. There's the fruit of promotion now. There's the vanity of glory. There's the insanity of life. Besides, if it were so that any mere sailor of the Pequod had a grudge against Flask and Flask's official capacity, all that sailor had to do, in order to obtain ample vengeance, was to go aft at dinner time and get a peep at Flask through the cabin skylight, sitting silly and dumbfounded before awful Ahab. Now Ahab and his 3 mates formed what may be called the first table in the Pequod's cabin. After their departure, taking place in inverted order to their arrival, the canvas cloth was cleared, or rather was restored in some hurried order by the pallid steward, and then the 3 harpooners were bidden to the feast, they being its residuary legatees. They made a sort of temporary servants' hall of the high and mighty cabin. In strange contrast to the hardly tolerable constraint and nameless invisible domineerings of the captain's table was the entire carefree license and ease, the almost frantic democracy of those inferior fellows, the harpooners. While their masters, the mates, seemed afraid of the sounds of the hinges of their own jaws, the harpooners chewed their food with such relish that there was a report to it. They dined like lords. They filled their bellies like Indian ships all day loading with spices. Such portentous appetites had Queequeg and Tashtego, that to fill out the vacancies made by the previous repast, often the pale doughboy was fain to bring on a great baron of salt junk, seemingly quarried out of the solid ox. And if he were not lively about it, if he did not go with a nimble hop, skip, and a jump, then Tashtego had an ungentlemanly way of accelerating him by darting a fork at his back, harpoon-wise. And once Daggoo, seized with a sudden humor, assisted Doughboy's memory by snatching him up bodily and thrusting his head into a great empty wooden trencher, while Tashtego, knife in hand, began laying out the circle preliminary to scalping him. He was naturally a very nervous, shuddering sort of little fellow, this bread-faced steward, the progeny of a bankrupt baker and a hospital nurse. And what then with the standing spectacle of the black, terrific Ahab and the periodical tumultuous visitations of these 3 savages, Doughboy's whole life was one continual lip quiver. Commonly, after seeing the harpooners furnished with all things they demanded, he would escape from their clutches into his little pantry adjoining, and fearfully peep at them through the blinds of the door till all was over. It was a sight to see Queequeg seated over against Tashtego, opposing his filed teeth to the Indians. Crosswise to them, Daggoo, seated on the floor, for a bench would have brought his hearse-plumed head for a bench would have brought his hearse-plumed head to the low car lines. At every motion of his colossal at every motion of his colo- at every motion of his colossal limbs, making the low cabin framework to shake as when an African elephant does passenger in a sh- as when an African elephant goes passenger in a ship. But but for all this, the great Negro was wondrously abstemious, not to say dainty. It seemed hardly possible that such comparatively small mouthfuls It seemed hardly possible that by such comparatively small mouthfuls he could keep up the vitality diffused through so broad, baronial, and superb a person. But doubtless this noble savage fed strong and drank deep of the abounding element of air, and through his dilated nostrils snuffed in the sublime life of the worlds. Not by beef or bread are giants made or nourished. But Queequeg, he had a mortal, barbaric smack of the lip in eating, an ugly sound enough, so much so that the trembling doughboy almost looked to see whether any marks of teeth lurked in his own lean arms. And when he could hear Tashtego singing out for him to produce himself, that his bones might be picked, the simple-witted steward all but shattered the crockery hanging about him in the pantry by his sudden fits of palsy. Nor did the whetstone, which the harpooners carried in their pockets for their lances and other weapons, and which with whetstones at dinner they would ostentatiously sharpen their knives, that grating sound did not at all tend to tranquilize poor Doughboy. He could not forget that in his island days, Queequeg, for one, must certainly have been guilty of some murderous convivial indiscretion. Alas, Doughboy, hard fares the white waiter who waits upon the cannibals. Not a napkin should he carry on his arm, but a buckler. In good time, though, to his great delight, the three salt sea warriors would rise and depart. To his credulous, fable-mongering ears, are all their martial bones jingling in them at every step, like Moorish scimitars in scabbards. But though these barbarians dined in the cabin, and nominally lived there, still, being anything but sedentary in their habits, they were scarcely ever in it except at meal times, and just before sleeping time, when they had passed through their own peculiar quarters. In this one matter, Ahab seemed no exception to most American whale captains, who at a set rather inclined to the opinion that by rights the ship's cabin belongs to them, and that it is by courtesy alone that anybody else is at any time permitted there. So that in real truth the mates and harpooners of the Pequod might more properly be said to have lived out of the cabin. So that in real truth the mates and harpooners of the Pequod might more properly be said to have lived out of the cabin than in it. For when they did enter it, it was something as a street door enters a house, turning inwards for a moment only to be turned out the next, and as a permanent thing residing in the open air. Nor did they lose much hereby. And the cabin was no companionship. In the cabin was no companionship. Socially, Ahab was inaccessible. Though nominally included in the census of Christendom, he was still an alien to it. He lived in the world as the last of the grizzly bears lived in settled Missouri, and as when spring and summer had departed, that wild Logan of the woods, burying himself in the hollow of a tree, lived out the winter there, sucking his own paws, so in his inclement, howling old age, Ahab's soul, shut up in the caved trunk of his body, fed there upon the sullen paws of its gloom. That was chapter 34. So thanks very much for watching. It was a good reading time, and I will talk to you later.